Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, July the 14th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, I have a post over at the American Thinker today, and I had a lot of fun writing it because it's about Mick Jagger. Now, if you're a baby, you don't have to be a baby boomer. I think a lot of people know who Mick Jagger is, of course. For me, when I was growing up as a baby boomer, Mick Jagger was the lead singer of the Rolling Stones. I mean, kind of the face of the Rolling Stones, although, Keith Richards was pretty big too. But nevertheless, Mick Jagger was, always a big favorite for those of us who were fans of the Rolling Stones. He co wrote a lot of their great songs with Keith Richards. And he was just, I'm going to say, he was kind of the personality of the Rolling Stones. He was the face. Yeah, I'll say the face of the Rolling Stones. Well, anyway, here recently in the last few weeks, Mick Jagger has decided to get into the political commentary business. And I'm glad he did, because what he basically said was, look, guys, he was talking to fellow rockers. He was saying, guys, stop lecturing people when you're doing a concert. Stop talking about politics. Just perform. Give people what they paid for, which is a performance. If you're going to see the Rolling Stones, whatever is left of the Rolling Stones, um, they want to see the Rolling Stones. They don't want to hear somebody, bringing up a political message as part of the Rolling Stones repertoire. That's not what people pay to see an artist. Certainly in my case, I just want to hear their songs. So Mick Jagger came out and said, hey guys, don't do that. I don't believe in doing that. I want to entertain people. I want to get their minds off of whatever's bothering them, their mortgages. He said their mortgages, their lives, just, basically he was saying, I just want to be a distraction. And I just thought it was absolutely great that Mick Jagger would say something like that, because he's exactly right. We've had too many of these performers who somehow decide that, first of all, they think we care about their political opinions, which I certainly don't. I mean, I certainly don't. And so, sometimes they will say something, and it's usually, if you, at least here recently, it's usually been something about Trump, because as you know, knocking Trump is the easiest way to get a headline. If you want to get a headline, say something about Trump, negative, that is. So Mick Jagger was saying, hey, not me, not me. I'm not into that. I just want to give people what they paid to see, and get the politics out of this. I thought it was a very smart thing for Mick Jagger to say. I've never thought of Mick Jagger as a statesman. That's not usually what I associate with Mick Jagger. But in this case, he's exactly right. He's exactly right. Just do the show, do the singing, do the entertaining, and leave the politics out of it. And I feel exactly 100%. I agree 100% with Mick. I also feel the same way about sports. If you remember a few years ago, when some NFL players were taking a knee, and then the NBA really got political. And I think it hurt the image of the sport. People don't care about that when they pay $50 to watch an NBA game, or whatever to watch an NFL game, or even on TV. You don't want all those political messages. You just want to watch a good game. So I think Mick Jagger ought to get applauded here by everyone in the industry, because I think he's kind of reminded everybody of common sense. Hey, common sense. Common sense is people are paying to watch you play, watch you sing. You know, I don't know. It reminded me of that song by the Rolling Stones, Get Off of My Cloud. Yeah, that's kind of what he's saying. Get off of my cloud. One of their big hits back whenever, when I remember the Stones, and I used to buy their LPs and 45s. Talk about dating myself. LPs and 45s. I wonder if a lot of the young people even know what that is. An LP and a 45. Well, the 45 was what we used to call the single. the little record with the big hole in it in the middle, and one song on one side and one song on the other. That was a 45. We used to call that a single. And obviously, the Rolling Stones had a bunch of those very successful big hits. They would usually release a big song on a 45 as well as an album, of course. But usually it came out on a 45, and that's how it got on Top 40 radio. And that's when you went down to the store and you bought the 45. I recall buying a 45 at one point in my life for 69 cents. So I guess I'm dating myself a little bit when I say these things, but I think Mick Jagger was 100% right in giving that advice to all of the rockers. Well, we understand that ICE is going to be changing some of their strategies. It's not going to be as much of a deal as people are making it out to be. Basically, what they're going to try to do is cut back on the car chase. I never really understood the car chase. I don't get that because you're riding a car through town, and if you're following a car and the people driving the car don't want to stop, the best thing to do is just to follow them or find some other way of stopping them. But when you confront them, then you obviously you create the possibility of somebody getting shot, as happened here, and I think it's probably a smart change to say from now on, we're not going to do that anymore. We'll try to figure out some other way of getting to the interested party. In the case of Houston is really the only place that this applies to. It doesn't apply to the case in Maine because that wasn't a car chase. That was just a car that was going through a gate. And the one up in Minneapolis, that wasn't a car chase. That was a lady using her car. So those are different, totally different situations. But the one in Houston was a car chase. And I think probably the smarter thing to do is not to do a car chase. If you want to stop a car, do it before they start the car, or maybe just follow the car. And then when it gets to its destination, when the car is parked, then do something about it. I think that's probably the smarter thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to avoid a person getting shot because, they could shoot at you if you try to, once they get out of the car. I mean, that could happen. But it does eliminate all the drama and the car chase and all the big scenes on TV like we saw in Houston. So I think it's a smart change, even though, as I said before, I don't think it applies to a lot of cases. Again, of those three, of the four people who've been killed, the two in Minneapolis, the one in Maine, and the one in Houston, it only applies to one of those four. Only one of those four was a car chase. The other three were very unique and different, had nothing to do with a car chase. So I think it's a smart change. It's a smart change in strategy, and we'll see how it works. The public still wants ICE to deport illegal immigrants. I just saw polling data that said 56% of the American people want to continue. But, you got to be smart about it. You don't want to be shooting people and then have to deal with all of the PR problems related to that. Well, some good news from June. Inflation came down a little bit. I guess as the price of oil dropped and the price of gasoline dropped, inflation came down a little bit. That's good news. That's always we're always good to report that or good to see that in the economic news. And I have a post about this coming out tomorrow. Secretary Rubio is doing something that a lot of us had wished somebody had done before. And that is really come down very hard on this so-called International Court of Justice. And all of these international courts and international agencies and committees or whatever they're called, who kept somehow messing with American foreign policy. The ICC, the International Court of Justice, had issued an arrest for the Prime Minister of Israel. But they never did that, for example, with Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez or a left-wing dictator. They only do it with they only do it with America's friends. They didn't do it with Castro. And if you compare Israel with Cuba, which one of these two countries is more free? Which one of them has a free press? Not Cuba, but Israel does. So I think the Trump administration, through Secretary Rubio, is coming down hard on this International Court of Justice and basically saying, you're not messing with us anymore. We don't, whatever institution you are, it doesn't apply to the United States. We're a sovereign country. The International Court of Justice has no jurisdiction about what happens in the United States. So we're out of it. Now, I don't think we even voted to be in the International Court of Justice. That's another thing. But nevertheless, we're not going to pay attention to it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing by Secretary Rubio. I'm glad. I'm so glad that he's doing that. He's turning out to be one heck of a Secretary of State. I'll just put it that way. I mean, it's just a fantastic job that he's doing. Well, we say today, on this day in history, we remember President Ford. Now, I was talking before about baby boomers. A lot of people don't even remember President Ford, unless you're a baby boomer. And you were around in the mid-'70s when President Nixon resigned, and then Vice President Ford became president, and Gerald Ford became the 38th president of the United States. He didn't serve a long time. He was only in there for 2.5 years because he lost to then Governor Carter, who was running for president against him in 1976. Very close election, that was. Very close election. But Carter won. Ford was carrying a little bit the weight of 8 years of, sometimes we change parties every 8 years. Ford was also defending the Nixon pardon, which, looking back at it now, was the right thing to do. And most historians see it as the right thing to do. In fact, President Ford was given a profile in courage by the Kennedy Foundation for the pardon, saying that it was the right thing to do that cost him politically. So we remember President Ford. He was born in Michigan. His real name was not Gerald Ford. That was the name of his adopted father. He had a different name. I don't remember what it was, but he was not born Gerald Ford. Later, as a young man, when he was adopted, I think as a little boy, he was adopted by a doctor named Gerald Ford, who married his mom. And he just, I guess he picked up that name. I'm not exactly sure of the whole story, but he became Gerald Ford after his adopted father. He went on to serve in the military. If you know anything about his biography or read his biography, he was an extremely handsome guy, a very good athlete who appeared in did some modeling, actually, I think, in some men's magazines, for dressing and that kind of thing. He appeared in some magazines as a male model, when men used to model, I guess, suits and shirts and all that kind of stuff. He did some work in that area. And then when he came back from the war, he went into the Congress, elected in 1946 to the House. And, he just went up all those years. He was in the House, almost 30 years. And he had promised Betty Ford, his wife, the future First Lady, that he was going to retire in 1976. But then, a little change of direction happened. And that's when he became first vice president and then president of the United States. And of course, that was a whole new direction, a whole new chapter in his life. But I always liked him a great deal. I always thought Gerald Ford was the right man at the right time for the United States. And as I said, I think a lot of people have forgotten about him, especially if you're not a baby boomer like me, because we remember that time. I do. But if you're not a baby boomer, you don't remember that period of the Watergate and Gerald Ford becoming president after Nixon resigned. I mean, we all lived through that. So a lot of baby boomers, of course, don't remember that. So that's why I think he probably has been largely forgotten by historians, although he does get good ratings when historians look back at his presidency. He gets good ratings, and he should. He was actually a very decent man who became president of the United States. So Gerald Ford, who was born on this day in 1913 and passed away in 2006. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later.